Hello, this is Dr. Davis, and today we're talking in lecture three. I guess I should start there. Today we're talking about attention and perception, um, and these are very important topics in consumer behavior. First of all, we want to know how you perceive things, or how the consumer, I should say, perceives things, and kind of how the consumer and why the consumer pays attention to things, because ultimately we want to influence those things. How do you perceive billboards? How can we make you pay attention, or influence you, I should say, pay attention to billboards? What catches your eye when you walk down the aisle of the supermarket, or of a beauty aisle, or a body wash aisle, or what catches your eye on television, right? So we can look at attention and perception from an advertising standpoint, when we look at kind of television advertisements, or magazine advertisements. We can also look at purchase behaviors in actual stores. There are so many ways we can use information about perception and attention, and so that's why it's such an important topic in consumer behavior. So hopefully you'll find something interesting in today's lecture, and if not, just know that some of this will be on the test. Okay, so let's just get started. As a reminder, perception involves selecting, organizing, and interpreting sensation. There are, five ways to kind of sense something, or sense external stimuli: visual, sound, smells, taste, touch, movement, that kind of thing. We do so, of course, with our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, so on and so forth. I'm going to focus primarily on visuals in this lecture, what we see, but we are going to talk a little bit about sound, smells, taste, that kind of thing. The way the process typically works for us to take in information, I apologize, is step one, we start with exposure. Step two, we have attention. We're exposed to something, and then we attend to it. We interpret it. We have some kind of comprehension, and then we perceive it. We turn it into how we view it, or how we interpret it, and that influences our memory, our attitudes, our buying intention, and our buying behavior. In this lecture, we go kind of out of whack. Instead of starting with step um, two, or step one, and then moving to step two, we'll talk about attention later. The topic is so big that, and the topic of perception is so big that I like to start first with perception, and then move on to attention. So I just want to point that out. Although the five steps, are exposure, attention, interpretation, comprehension, and perception, will go a little bit out of order, based on kind of the brevity or depth of the lecture. One process underlying perception is exposure. So exposure is the process of bringing some stimulus within the proximity of a consumer so that it can be sensed by one of the five human senses. So you can bring a smell, or a picture, an advertisement, so on and so forth, within the proximity of a consumer. So how do marketers gain exposure? We gain exposure through advertisements, through point of purchase displays, which are really important for cigarette companies. So if you go and look at a grocery store, or a gas station, if you look at the cigarette area, you'll see a lot of point of purchase signs and logos, and so on and so forth, to influence the consumer and gain exposure. We do it with shelf space. You go to the grocery store, and you'll see not only point of purchase displays, but you'll see a certain amount of shelf space dedicated to certain products. Oftentimes, large amounts of shelf space really influence exposure for the consumer. End caps, so end of shelf units, are one way of gaining exposure when it comes to shelf space. We gain exposure with logos, with freebies. So giving out free products. We get a lot of free products here from Quicken Loans. So you go to the student bash at the beginning of the year, and Quicken Loans is giving you, power cord or a cord for your what do you call those? An AUX cord, or they're giving you pens or those stress balls, so on and so forth. Samples, you go to Costco or Sam's Club or somewhere like this, and they give you a sample of a product. Guerrilla marketing is another way we gain exposure. When companies use some kind of surprising or unconventional interactions to promote a product. We'll talk about that later. Viral advertising, although marketers haven't been really good at capturing exactly what makes something go viral. When you have something that does go viral, it tends to be pretty big and good for advertisers. I'm sure we can all think of something that's gone viral recently within the marketing world. And then product placement, so where you embed a product or a brand into something like a film or television, something like this. This is another way to gain exposure, and we'll talk more about it in a minute, product placement in a minute. So, in the marketing information environment, there are a few types of ways that consumers are exposed to products. The first, or to information. The first is intentional exposure to marketing information. This is when consumers purposefully search for information relevant to a goal or problem they have. As an example, I wear lipstick about 50% of the time, and I will go online to search different lipstick products. If you're a gamer, you might go online to search different games. If you like something like sewing, you might go online to search for patterns or ideas. We all know different products and things that we've searched online for, and this would be called intentional exposure to marketing information, because this information may affect kind of your future purchases, your future consumption, so on and so forth. We can also have accidental exposure to marketing information, where you accidentally or unexpectedly encounter marketing information within your environment. So you see marketing information at bus stops, at event endorsements, so on and so forth. So, for example, you could be reading a magazine and you're clicking through an article that you like to read, or swipe, passing by, reading an article that you're interested in, and embedded in the article you see an advertisement for shampoo, or you see an advertisement here for underwear, so on and so forth. These things are called accidental exposure. A lot of times marketing information is provided to you accidentally, right? Not that we don't search for marketing information, it's just that there's so much marketing in the world, you're constantly being exposed to some kind of marketing information. I mean, even something as simple as walking in the classroom and seeing people with shirts on with different companies and logos. This is accidental exposure to marketing information. So there are marketing actions that can be taken to influence exposure or consumers' exposure to marketing stimuli. The first is to facilitate intentional exposure. So when consumers are searching for marketing information, you can provide promotions and or sales ads, right? So let's say I go to Target's website and I decide that what I really want to do is buy curtains. And when I pull up curtains, I see that Target is having a home sale for 25% off all home goods. That is going to influence me. Let's say I'm looking at curtains, and on the side of the page, they show that they're a sales ad where curtain rods are on sale. That will influence me. You can have elaborate product brochures, and this tends to be important for expensive products, right? So when someone wants to buy an RV, let's say they've decided to retire and travel across the U.S., or they've finished college and they've decided to do it, or they've never finished college, all these different scenarios. Anyway, they want an RV. When you're selling something like an expensive RV, right? Not a secondhand inexpensive one, but for an expensive RV, you're going to want to provide a product brochure. I could see you also wanting to do that if you're trying to sell something like timeshares or um, something like um, I don't know, name something expensive that people might buy that you might need product brochures. I guess you can think about it. I came up with two examples. Ooh, kind of ran out of examples. You could also facilitate intentional exposure with well-trained salespeople. And you see this when you go to, a car dealership or different places like this. You have these well-trained salespeople. They know the cars inside out. Hopefully, they know financing and this kind of thing inside out as well. You can also have in-store seminars to help people understand the product. I think Sprint and a couple of other cell phone providers started these seminars to help people understand how to use their cell phones in an effort to get people to want to buy more expensive cell phones. So, for example, I probably, if they had much cheaper options, would stick with those. I don't really do a lot on my cell phone. Um, so on and so forth. For accidental exposure, what you want to do as a marketer is you want to maximize accidental exposure. So you can increase the number of ads in an area. If you know people in a certain area like to do some things, you can use that information to place ads there. If you're trying to get people to go to a party, you might put more ads on a college campus, right? Than you would in the general population or in a general area, for example. You can locate retail stores in high traffic areas. We see something like this happening with downtown Detroit right now. We see more retailers coming. I think you see the population of people at least living and then kind of coming to downtown has increased some. So that being said, downtown recently got an H&M, a Madewell, a Lululemon. Is that what they call it? Lululemon. You think I know, I live close to it. Um, they also have always had the Nike store. I think you'll see more retailers come, and that it's just a matter of time. So, and then of course you can increase your number of things like product placements in movies and TVs and mobile advertising. Movies and TV shows are important, not TVs, TV shows, I should say, are important. Mobile advertising, however, is huge. Think how often people use their cell phones. People are starting to do things like look for coupons. A lot of people shop on their phones. So mobile advertising is huge, and as huge as it is, I still think it's somewhat untapped. So I think in the coming years, you'll see more happening with mobile advertising. One thing to be aware of is what we call selective exposure. We know from research that consumers tend to avoid exposure, right? So, one thing that's really interesting is that uh, research has shown that the DVR is really not an issue. Why is that? It used to be assumed that when the DVR came out, right, when DVRs came out, that people would skip through ads, and that is the main reason that other people that consumers aren't seeing ads on television. It turns out that it's not the DVR, right? It's not that people record shows and then skipped ads. It's really that even throughout the show and throughout commercials, a lot of people are really stuck on their cell phones doing things. And so that's the main way that people are avoiding the show itself as well as advertisements. So people and their cell phones are more problematic than the DVR. So anyway, we know that consumers avoid advertising. We call this selective exposure. There are some ways that consumers selectively avoid exposure to advertising messages, and I'll talk about a few. The first is called zipping. That is when people fast forward through a commercial on a pre-recorded program. So using the DVR, you're watching a program, commercials come, and you fast forward through that commercial. Another one, I guess, is called zapping. So this happens when you switch channels when a commercial appears. So you're watching TV, commercial comes on, you go to another channel. And then, of course, we always talk about muting, which is when you turn off the sound um, that should say during commercial breaks, not curing, but turn off the sound during commercial breaks. So zipping, zapping, and muting are three ways that consumers avoid advertising um, when they're watching a program. And so if you're an advertiser, you want to know if this is really happening throughout your program and what you can do to make sure that this isn't true, right? You make your advertisements more interesting. Maybe you offer giveaways throughout the ad. You get people really focused on the television show, so they're scared to change channels so they don't miss anything, so on and so forth. Because advertising is really expensive and you're paying, if you're a company, of course, you're paying for this exposure. I mentioned earlier that we were going to circle back to product placements. So, product placements occur when companies embed their brand, their logo, their products within a storyline. They can do that using a movie. They can do it on television shows or in television shows. Any kind of storyline, more so than traditional ads, the advertisements you see on TV that happen between storylines, right? They're not a part of the actual show. They can be more effective than traditional ads, and I'll give you 4 reasons why. One, they grab attention. Consumers tend to pay attention either consciously or subconsciously of product placements, and so consumers tend to notice them. Two, they can be cost efficient. In some cases, it costs significantly less to pay for product placements than it does to pay for advertisements, especially when you think about advertisements on primetime television and or advertisements during specific uh, big television events. So, for example, it may be more cost efficient to put your movie in the Avenger, put your brand, your logo, or your product in a movie like The Avengers or James Bond than it would to pay for a 1 minute advertising spot during the Super Bowl, which is coming up, or during the Final Four or something like this. Um, Unlike, and this is a big deal, number three is a big, big deal. Unlike traditional advertisements where you can zip, you can zap, or you can mute, um, when you embed your product within the show itself, within the storyline, consumers traditionally don't mute or skip over those, right? So no one is turning off their TV during a show they want to see because the actor is using, a Dell laptop, for example. And then it also can be highly influential. If an actor you like, let's say, Daniel Craig as James Bond is using a Dell laptop, it can influence consumers, and it does influence consumers to go out and buy themselves a Dell laptop, right? If their favorite character or even their least favorite character on a show they love is using a product. And they know, and the consumer sees it either consciously or subconsciously, it can be highly influential. So having the product in the movie or in the television show or in uh, the actor or actress's hands are obvious ways to get consumers to notice a product either consciously or subconsciously. Um, but if you really want to be effective, if you want people to remember the product placement, if you want people to 100% act on it, you should have, and this makes sense, you should have the actors or actresses or whoever talk up the product. And so Nielsen did some research to see what was the most recalled in program product placements and dramas and sitcoms, and they found something really interesting. It came to be known, and this again makes total sense, that people are going to remember things more if the leads or even non-lead actors and actresses talk up the features of the product itself. And so they saw, like, on Castle, um, and on Bones, the main leads talked up the features of the cars that were included in the show. So car companies did product placement to put their cars in the show. They had the actors or actresses talk about those products, and consumers remembered those product placements more. So, if the actor is like, oh, yes, this Toyota Avalon is the really great. I just love these heated seats, and I love how it has this great GPS system. Consumers are just going to remember that. And it probably later on, when they're trying to look for a car, they'll remember it then too, right? It just tends to be more effective. So, marketing actions when it comes to exposure, what we want to do is encourage and continued exposure. So, we can do that with infomercials, we can do that with advert games. We talked about advert games last week. Specifically, we talked about young kids seeing advert games. We know that when people use advert games, right? So McDonald's has one, Pizza Hut has one. They can stay on these games for 15 minutes to an hour, and it doesn't have to be little kids. Adults use these games as well. When people play advert games, they're exposed to advertising for 15 minutes to an hour, right? That's a big deal. And when they're on these advert games, it tends to increase the frequency of brand purchase. Two-thirds of people who play these advert games come back to play more. What's really astounding to me is that 81% of players will email their friends to try a good game. I personally have never been emailed by a friend or someone I know to try an advert game. I would find that extremely weird, but people who are my friends know me. And so maybe one of the things that's true is that they don't email me because they know me, and they know that I would find it weird. I don't know. I'm vocal on the weirdness of kind of, and things that I find weird. I guess that's me. FYI for you. All right. So marketers have a lot of in-store marketing tactics to get you to attend to and comprehend and kind of be exposed to their brands. So they have these standalone displays. Some places will let you taste product or sample products. I don't know how that's going to work after COVID. Product giveaways, and music and advertising and so on and so forth. Sensation. So, sensation is the immediate response of our sensory receptors, our eyes, our nose, our mouth, our fingers, those kind of things, your mouth, to basic stimuli like odor, texture, taste, sound, color, so on and so forth. And the way that it typically works is that we have our sensory stimuli, which of course are, our taste, our smell, our sound. We have our sensory receptors, our eyes, our nose, our mouth, our skin that accept that stimuli. And then we, from that point on, have exposure, attention, and interpretation. Talk about our senses, we can think about sensory inputs. And so we have these sensory systems, vision, smell, sound, taste, touch, and they really affect our perceptions and our preferences, and ultimately they affect our choices as consumers. So, starting with vision, about 80% of the information that we receive from our environment really is gained through vision, right? It's just gained through your sense of sight. So things like the color, the shape, the size, the movement. Oftentimes, as consumers, our eyes are the first thing to make contact with a product or an advertisement. So it's very influential when it comes to kind of consumer behavior. When you think about smell, smell is very important because a lot of times smell evokes these memories, right? And usually nothing, actually, no sense other than smell,
is more important when it comes to evoking memories. So scents can have the incredible ability to stir emotions, they can elicit memories, they can produce hunger, they can induce relaxation, they can even repel us, right? So marketers have long recognized this idea of using scent. We know that some stores use it. I'll talk about that a little bit in the next slide. But I know, for example, like Abercrombie and Fitch, when I was a kid, you go in there and I just really didn't like the smell, but a lot of other people did. So it was kind of confusing, whatever. So then we can think about sound. So a lot of times sound comes to us through speech, it comes to us through music. It tends to play a significant role in marketing, right? So music can influence your store sales. Research has shown a positive relationship between the use of popular songs in advertisements and consumers' ability to recall those advertisements, which is one reason that a lot of companies advertise with popular music as opposed to kind of newer, fresher music. Um, Music can influence store sales. I mean, you go into a store and a lot of times they have some soundtrack. I know, for example, Starbucks, they every store has the same soundtrack and they just listen to it over and over. It's kind of like elevator music, right? On the other side, though, excessive noise can be problematic as well, and it can have a negative impact on sales, right? So, I live downtown. There are people who move out of downtown because of the noise during the summer, as one example. Taste is another sense that we have that tends to be very important, right? The impact of taste is just very evident in the food and beverage industry. In America, we tend to like things sweeter. So if you go abroad, you'll notice that things like Coke or, even a donut, they don't really use donuts, but, even a pastry will be definitely less sweet than you might get elsewhere. I remember watching a YouTube video of an Asian man, I believe he was Chinese, and his grandmother, and he had her trying Panda Express, right? And so they were talking about orange chicken, and it actually ended up being funny because again we like sweet things, and so orange chicken would play into that more so than some of the other things that we might have on offer. They might have on offer. And then let's not forget about touch. Surprisingly, little research has been done on the effects of touch or tactile stimulation on consumer behaviors. However, there is some research that suggests the texture of a product or package can influence perceptions of quality. There's also some research that shows that consumers are more likely to buy a product if the salesperson that's helping them actually casually touches them. So, for example, the person casually touches their arm or casually touches, their shoulder or something like this. I guess one reason would be it might convey, caring and concern, and so the person feels more positive about the product. But research has shown that. I've always thought that was interesting.
Sensory marketing is actually kind of cool. It's marketing or advertising um, capable of engaging the senses of the customer and affecting their behavior, their judgment, or their perceptions. So, for example, when you walk into an Apple store, right, you are given this kind of perception that it's very high tech, that it's very modern, because they have this all white interior, very sleek looking, not a lot of clutter outside of all the people in the store. But they do that very much on purpose, right? Just like Starbucks. Starbucks chooses the type of music that's played in their stores, and all of their stores play the same songs, right? Or you could think of a store like Abercrombie and Fitch, which uses certain music. They have dim lighting. The main thing that always stands out for Abercrombie and Fitch, though, is the smell of the store. According to them and the research that they've done, these things, the scent, the dimness, the music, how loud it is, all attract younger adults, and actually kind of detract or yeah, basically detract older adults. Older adults don't want to go in a store and smell such an intense scent. Although I will say, this is a general idea of how things work in terms of sensory marketing. I've gone into an Abercrombie and Fitch store when I was younger, and I didn't like the smell then either. And then Dunkin' Donuts also uses sensory marketing. They actually in South Korea, this is kind of cool. They had these scent emitters installed on buses that emitted the scent of Dunkin' Donuts coffee. And what they found is that they got this significant rise in sales because people would get off the bus in those locations at those specific bus stops and then grab a cup of coffee.